Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar entitled Math Pathways 101, Overview of the Components, Work Completed, and Next Steps. My name is Dr. Jennifer Bonds-Raacke, and I'm from the Academic Affairs Division of the Kansas Board of Regents. Some of you may recognize me from my tenure at Fort Hays State, where I served as a department chair and dean. I later advanced to a provost and a president position at St. Martin's University. Following my father's passing, I returned to Hays, and I'm grateful that my current role at KBOR allows me to remain engaged in higher education, focusing on student success, a cause I care deeply about as a first-generation student. My colleague today from Academic Affairs will be joining us a little later, and they will introduce themselves during their respective presentation. So let's go ahead and get started by sharing the presentation and reviewing our agenda for today. So this presentation will begin by reviewing the importance of Math Pathways work, especially related to student success and KBOR's strategic plan Building a Future. Next, the presentation will provide an overview of the various components of Math Pathways, including selection of gateway courses by program, multiple placement measures, and co-requisite development. Our time together will conclude with a Q&A, so please use your chat function throughout the presentation to submit any questions that you may have. Now I would like to introduce my colleague, Sam Christy Dangermond. Sam?
Hello, everybody. Many of you might know me. I'm a director for academic affairs at KBOR. I've been with KBOR for about 9.5 years and with academic affairs for about 7. So what I'm going to be doing is we're going to start by talking about why. Why are we doing what we're doing with these Math Pathways initiatives? We're going to begin our presentation by touching on KBOR's strategic plan, Building a Future, and we're going to talk about its intersection with Math Pathways. So Building a Future is KBOR's strategic plan, and it grounds our system's work in serving Kansas families and businesses while advancing economic prosperity. This document is designed to be a living plan, encouraging strategic adjustments to better support each of 3 pillars. Those pillars are family, business, and economic prosperity. Now, what makes it unique nationally is its commitment to promising practices that drive progress. Additionally, the annual Board of Regents goals are closely aligned with this strategic plan. So, for example, one of the board goals for academic year 2023 was related to the affordability and on-time graduation areas of focus under that family pillar. Goal 2 for the board that year was formulate system-wide math general education courses and meta majors for the purposes of Math Pathways, and define the system-wide general education math course that is required for each respective system-wide meta major. So as such, the model for the new performance agreements for academic year 2024 through 2026 that institutions enter into with the board was changed to be a projects-based model, and it was designed around this goal to drive full implementation of Math Pathways, system-wide math and English course placement measures, and co-requisite developmental support by fall of 2026. So the Math Pathways initiative specifically align with the family areas of focus, affordability, access, and success through initiatives driven by those things. And on the next slide, we will look at a few examples that highlight this focused alignment. So how do Math Pathways initiatives support Pillar 1, affordability, access, and success? So improving access. KBOR data reveal that Black and Hispanic students enroll in prerequisite developmental courses at higher rates and have lower success rates compared to white students. Replacing these prerequisites with co-requisite support removes barriers, it improves access to gateway courses, and it provides just-in-time support, potentially increasing success rates for all students. Additionally, math courses directly related to students' programs of study are more engaging and relevant, also improving access. That second item, successful completion of gateway math courses, Completing these courses contributes to earning credits toward a degree, improves self-efficacy, it positively impacts GPA, and it supports overall student success. Higher retention rates. Nationally, math pathways are associated with higher retention rates. Students who successfully complete required courses are more likely to remain enrolled and continue their studies. And on-time graduation and reduced costs. Students who pass gateway math courses on their first attempt and avoid multiple semesters of non-credit prerequisites are more likely to graduate on time. This shorter time to degree completion reduces costs for both students and institutions. Retaining current students is typically more cost-effective than recruiting new ones. So on the previous slide, we briefly talked about implementing these math pathways initiatives and how that can improve on-time graduation rates. But how could this be helpful to students in Kansas? So to provide some context, we're going to take a look at the on-time graduation rates for students in Kansas by type of institution. Now, these numbers are from 2022. And so specifically, the average on-time graduation rate for our state universities that year was 46.3%. It was 41.4% at community colleges, and that includes the transfer out rate. And it was 52.8% at technical colleges. So these numbers, while not awful, but they're not great. So they demonstrate that we have room for improvement in supporting students to complete their degree requirements on time in our state. Similarly, we can examine retention rates within our state. Retention rates measure the number of first-time students who return and enroll for the fall semester of their second year. This slide displays the retention rates for students in Kansas by type of institution. Again, specifically, the average retention rate in 2022 for state universities was 81.4%. It was 61.9% for community colleges and 70.4% at technical colleges. So from these slides, we can see how the work of math pathways intersects with and supports our strategic plan in numerous ways. And now we're going to take a look at math developmental education in our system up until at least recently. So there is a lot of data on this slide, and it depicts the percentage of students between 2010 and 2022 enrolling in and successfully completing developmental math and college algebra within a 2-year time frame. You can see that just over 1/4 of all community college students enrolled in a developmental math course during this period. And of those, about 66% successfully completed that developmental math course. However, just under 1/5 of those students successfully completed college algebra as well within a 2-year window. For universities, about 12.5% of those students enrolled in a developmental math course, with almost 70% successfully completing it, but just over 1/3 of those students successfully completed college algebra within a 2-year window. So you can hopefully see that there is quite a bit of room for improvement here. This next slide depicts the same things over the same time period, but it breaks the students down by race and gender. So first, I'd like to direct your attention to that column under the heading percent enrolled in Dev Math course or developmental math course. You can see that Hispanic and African American students enrolled in a developmental math course at higher rates than their white counterparts in our system. Then take a look at the column on that far right-hand side. It shows the percentage of students who successfully completed both the developmental math course and the college algebra course. None of these percentages are great, but you can see that Hispanic and African American students did not fare even as well as white students in this endeavor. Comparing whites to African Americans at community colleges, almost 21% of whites successfully completed both courses. But for African Americans, you can see not quite 14% successfully completed both courses. And for Hispanics, only about 19%. So we're really hoping to improve all completion rates and also close that performance gap through these initiatives. Something else worth noting here is that we know that some institutions have 2 or even 3 semesters of prerequisite coursework a student must complete, depending on how they place at that institution right now. This affects when and even whether the student gets to the gateway course. So by removing the obstacles of several semesters or even just one additional semester of prerequisite support, we hope to see higher rates of successful completion of these gateway math courses. Right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Jen.
Thanks so much, Sam. And just a reminder to all our attendees, feel free at any point to drop questions in the chat so that we'll have those at the end of our presentation. So now that we have our work grounded in the reason why and with an understanding of the potential positive impacts to student success, let's discuss the first component to math pathways, the selection of a gateway math course. As we know, college algebra is traditionally the math course that college students complete as part of their general education requirements. However, national experts in the field of mathematics now indicate that only 20% of majors need the skills covered in college algebra. Over the next few slides, I will share data documenting Kansas enrollment trends in college algebra. And this data supports the traditional approach of having all students, regardless of their program needs, enroll in college algebra. So for academic year 2023, you can see that over 19,000 students enrolled in college algebra across the system. However, it is likely that only around 3,800 students will need the content from college algebra for their future careers. The trend of high enrollment in college algebra continues across the state, including dual enrollment. So for the same academic year, over 7,000 high school students enrolled in college algebra compared to only 12 students who enrolled in contemporary math. So in Kansas, if you can advance, Sam, there were 4 key developments that really converged all around the same time and around the topic of math education. First, math reform has become one of the most significant changes at the undergraduate level in higher education across our nation. Next, the Future of Higher Education Council, established by the Board of Regents in response to the Kansas legislature, approved 14 recommendations for the board to consider. The top 2 recommendations were co-requisite support and math pathways. Third, Kansas KBOR strategic plan, Building a Future, focuses on removing barriers and promoting access, affordability, success, and completion. And then finally, the Council of Presidents expressed a strong interest in math reform. So with these converging events, Kansas embarked on its math pathways efforts. The first step was developing and offering 3 gateway math courses at all institutions with programs needing the 3 courses, giving programs greater flexibility in selecting a gateway math course that aligns with student needs. And these 3 courses are as follows. First, we have elementary statistics. In this course, students will learn the basics of descriptive statistics, probability, sampling, confidence intervals, distributions, hypothesis testing, regression, and correlation. Next, we have contemporary math, where students will study logic and apply mathematics to finance, geometry, number sense, probability, and some basic statistics. And then college algebra, which will remain the same. So over the past 18 months, faculty from across the state of Kansas gathered by discipline to discuss the most suitable gateway math course for students enrolled in their programs. By reaching consensus across institutions, students can transfer to any institution within the state to pursue their major, knowing that the gateway math course remains the same. This approach is particularly beneficial for our community college students. After these discipline meetings, the collected decisions were confirmed by the chief academic officers, or CAOs. We then asked institutions to work with their IR divisions to ensure that KBOR's list of programs match their internal records. Additionally, we collaborated with institutions to ensure that new programs added during the academic year 2024 had designated Gateway Math course decisions. The list of courses was shared with the System-Wide General Education Council at the end of August, as institutions will be including these courses in the math and stats bucket for the Kansas System-Wide General Education Framework. And finally, the list of the courses was shared with BASC as a notification item in September. So I'd like to start by taking a high-level look at the types of programs and their Gateway Math course selections. The goal is to give a sense of the types of programs where each Gateway Math course will be most applicable. So this word art depicts the types of majors that selected college algebra for their Gateway course. Example programs include engineering, chemistry, biology, and business. Moving forward and looking at contemporary math, this word art depicts the types of majors that selected contemporary math, such as humanities, art, and communication. And then finally, this word art illustrates the types of majors that selected elementary statistics. Example programs here include psychology, sociology, and criminal justice. While the word art is helpful in understanding the big picture, we need a clear mechanism to communicate specific Gateway Math courses by programs. So the KBOR website now features a subpage under the Math Pathways section titled Gateway Math Course Decisions. Here you can access the specific decisions made by the various programs. The decisions are represented in multiple ways, so you can search by all programs across all institutions within the state, by a specific Gateway Math course across institutions, or by an individual institution. In the future, our goal is to make the Gateway Math course decisions available through the searchable program inventory on the KBOR website. Now we will shift our focus to Gateway Math from Gateway Math courses to multiple placement measures. And this is another important aspect of our Math Pathways work. So starting first with a philosophical approach to course placement, traditionally higher education institutions have relied on standardized tests to place students into Gateway Math and English courses. While these assessments have their place, relying solely on a single test score offers a limited evaluation. A more holistic approach uses multiple measures for course placement, such as the ACT/SAT subject scores, completion of a specific high school course, or achieving a certain high school GPA. This approach has proven to be a better predictor of college success and helps reduce unnecessary developmental education placements. Kansas colleges and universities have traditionally relied on this standardized assessment approach and operated under a system where each institution independently determines a student's eligibility to enroll in a Gateway Math or English course. This lack of uniformity can result in up to 32 different standards across the state's higher education institutions. The absence of a system-wide readiness standard for college math and English has created a missed opportunity to communicate clear expectations to high school teachers, counselors, and students planning for higher education. With this in mind, a system-wide math course placement committee was first convened in February 2024. President Flanders attended the initial meeting and charged the committee with developing recommendations for system-wide multiple placement measures for 3 Gateway courses. The 3 we've discussed before: college algebra, elementary statistics, and contemporary math. The committee met on 7 occasions from February through July to reach consensus on the proposed recommendations. In the upcoming slides, I will present the committee's recommendations for placing students into the Gateway courses without prerequisite developmental support. This slide is a visual depiction of the charge of the committee. So the question is, does the student meet one of the following? And the committee was charged with developing number 1. What would the system-wide course placement measures be for each of the Gateway courses? If a student meets one of those or an institutionally designated placement measure, they are eligible for the Gateway course without prerequisite support. If they do not, they would be placed into the Gateway Math course with prerequisite support. So now we'll move into those recommendations per class. As a reminder, per KBOR policy, each student who meets either a system-wide course placement measure or an institutionally designated course placement measure is eligible to enroll in the Gateway course without developmental support. Students who do not meet either would be placed into the Gateway course with developmental support. This slide presents the committee's recommendations for the scores needed to place into college algebra without the co-requisite developmental support. Students need only demonstrate readiness by achieving one of these scores. And I would like to draw your attention to the option for an institutional measure and professional discretion. I'm going to read this part from policy. Policy states that an institutionally designed course placement measure could include, but is not limited to, vendor-based assessments, homegrown assessments, or an evaluation of non-cognitive factors such as motivation and workplace experiences. These measures are approved at the institutional level and only apply in cases in which the student does not meet any of the applicable system-wide course placement measures. This category also provides institutions the professional discretion to place students in the Gateway course by considering scores on multiple measures rather than a single measure, as well as non-cognitive factors known to the institution. So I'll give you a minute to take a look at the math, ACT, and SAT scores as we begin looking at contemporary math and elementary statistics. So this slide presents the committee's recommendations for scores needed to place into these two courses without co-requisite support. Again, students only need to demonstrate readiness by achieving one of these scores. I'd like to briefly explain why the committee recommended different scores for college algebra compared to these two Gateway courses. Committee members with expertise in mathematics noted that many assessments are designed to measure readiness for college algebra rather than the skills needed for contemporary math and elementary statistics. Therefore, the different scores do not reflect the rigor of the course, but rather the specific skills the assessments are intended to measure. It should be noted that institutions can use professional discretion when searching for evidence of a student's ability to complete a Gateway math course. However, discretion does not allow institutions to do two things. First, an institution cannot eliminate or disregard an approved statewide measure. For example, an institution could not refuse to accept one of the measures like an SAT score. Next, an institution cannot prevent a student from enrolling in a Gateway course if they meet one of the statewide scores. So if we think about this overall, you can use professional discretion with evidence to bump a student up, but not to bump a student down. It's also worth noting that institutions must seek approval for use of evidence-based discretion. Okay, moving on, recommendations for the multiple placement measures were approved by BASC in September, and CAOs have been notified of these decisions. The Placement Measures Committee also provided implementation considerations, which are being shared with relevant stakeholders during fall training sessions as campuses make institutional decisions about implementation. The KBOR website now features a subpage under the Math Pathways section titled Multiple Placement Measures Decisions. Here you can access the specific multiple placement measure decisions by Gateway course, as well as review background information of the work. And now I will turn things back over to Sam. Sam.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the co-requisite support piece and what that's going to look like. So the far left section of this slide shows a prerequisite developmental education sequence before the student gets to the Gateway math course. It shows how many barriers present to students who are at the lowest level of college math readiness. It can take up to 4 semesters for a student to complete the general education math course at some institutions, and these levels do exist in our system. Other students who are more college ready, but who don't meet institutional cutoffs to get into the Gateway math course may need some remediation before the general education math course. Typically, this has been college algebra for the Gateway course. That scenario is represented in the center section of the slide. And even then, it takes a minimum of 2 semesters to complete the general education math course. And as you saw earlier in the presentation, a relatively low percentage of students are completing both the developmental course and the Gateway course within a 2-year period. Remember, that was just under 35% for universities and just under 20% for community colleges for that given time period. But the right-hand section of the slide represents the time required for students who may not be college math ready, but who are able to receive developmental support alongside that Gateway course, reducing time to completion for the math requirement to 1 semester. And as you can imagine, we are hoping this change will to co-requisite developmental support will help improve access, reduce time to degree, and increase affordability for some students. So there are a lot of things in policy that we want to cover with folks today, with some important pieces highlighted. I know policy is not the most exciting thing, but we think it's important to get across some of these important pieces of information. So policy defines the Gateway English course and it defines the Gateway Math course, but the most notable piece on this slide is the fact that it points out that intermediate algebra is a developmental course based on content and rigor, and that it cannot be used to satisfy a general education Gateway math course requirement. That's super important because I know that's a change for many of our institutions. Now, this next slide on this first bullet is just a reminder that setting system-wide course placement measures is in KBOR policy. Jen went over those placement measures just a little bit ago, but policy requires that system-wide course placement measures be implemented for both Gateway Math and English courses. We shared the math with you. English is working on those measures as we speak. The second bullet here shows the definition of prerequisite developmental education, and it stresses that these courses are not to be applied toward certificate or degree requirements. This includes elective credit. These courses are not to be applied toward any type of requirement toward a certificate or degree. Policy also defines co-requisite support developmental education as a support section taken at the same time or in the same semester as the Gateway English or Math course. It gives students extra support and increases the likelihood that they will pass that Gateway course. A lot of you have these courses presented as combination courses or supplemental sections. Often they're called college algebra with review or something like that. Students spend extra time in the course and are presented foundational content that they need to grasp the concepts in the Gateway level course. Policy also discusses various aspects of co-requisite support. So it indicates that sections can be tailored for specific student groups and offered for different amounts of credit, up to 3 semester credit hours. But don't get this confused with credit toward the degree or credential. Also, in the upcoming slides, we will review the models or sections of co-requisite support developmental education recognized by KBOR. But we will get to that in a moment. So the next piece I want to share is that tuition and fees can be charged as otherwise authorized for each institution's credit-bearing courses, and credit awarded in co-requisite developmental education sections shall not be used to fulfill requirements for associate or baccalaureate degrees or certificates. So again, just like that prerequisite developmental section, you cannot use credit in co-requisite developmental education to apply toward requirements for associate or baccalaureate degrees or certificates. So we're going to start talking about the types of co-requisite developmental education delivery that board policy allows for. The first is probably the most common we've seen in the system thus far, that supplemental course section. That's where a student is in a supplemental course section. They attend that support developmental education section model, in which there are structured courses that run before, after, or on opposite days to the gateway course. Key piece, the gateway course and the concurrent supplemental course are completed in the same semester. The next type is the mandatory tutoring section. A student in a mandatory tutoring section attends a co-requisite support developmental education section model in which mandatory tutoring in a lab is required, or something like a lab, is required for a specified number of hours per week. And again, the gateway course and the concurrent mandatory tutoring are completed in the same semester. These next two types are pretty different and are probably not recommended for most students who fall into the category of needing support to pass the college level course. They might work for certain populations of students, maybe students who had mastered the content at one time, but maybe they've been out of school for a while and they need some refreshing. So that third type is that boot camp section. A student in a boot camp section attends a co-requisite support developmental education model in which the first 3 to 5 weeks of the semester are typically developmental content, and that's followed by college level content in the remainder of the semester. Classes meet extra hours each week throughout the semester to equal the 2 classes or class plus lab. The boot camp and gateway course are completed in the same semester. And then that final piece, the compressed course section, very similar to the boot camp section, just a little more time may be spent on that developmental content, maybe about 8 weeks of developmental content and then 8 weeks of gateway math content. Classes meet extra hours each week throughout the semester to deliver the applicable credit hours of instruction for both the co-requisite section and the gateway course within the compressed time frame. So those are the 4 types that the board recognizes, and institutions can use those 4 types. They can use combinations thereof. So now we're going to talk a little bit about institutional decisions. Again, institutions can select any of those models that we just talked about. They can select multiple models if they want to best fit the needs of various populations of students. In presentations for math faculty, we outline best practices related to each of the models, as research provides clear direction on which models and which ways of implementing the models are the most effective. The institution can decide on the nature of the course. Institutions will make many decisions around the nature of the course. For example, with any of the 4 models, the course can be combined or standalone. Institutions will also need to decide if the assignments and the grades are combined or standalone. The credit hour decisions. Keep in mind that credit hours related to the co-requisite developmental support cannot be applied toward a degree. Beyond this policy, institutions can make decisions regarding the credit hours associated with the support, up to 3 semester hours of credit. And institutions can decide on tuition and fees. They can be charged as otherwise authorized for each institution's credit-bearing courses. And finally, the institution decides about faculty assignments, workload, and compensation. These decisions are owned by the institution. We know that faculty members in the math department are being called upon to develop new courses, in many instances, contemporary math and elementary statistics, as well as the content for the co-requisite support. This requires time and professional development, and to a certain degree, a willingness to embrace a new approach to math education. In some, it's a heavy lift, and we encourage institutions to consider how this important work they're called upon to do can be recognized, valued, and compensated. So a few more policy points to touch on. Just a reminder, students who meet either a system-wide course placement measure for math or English or an institutional measure should be eligible to enroll in that Gateway Math or English course without the developmental support. Any student meeting neither a system-wide nor an institutional measure shall be placed into the Gateway course with developmental support. I know I'm repeating what Jen said, but sometimes we think repetition is very helpful. And then finally, this is something that we haven't yet talked about. Each student who demonstrates proficiency at a higher level than the Gateway Math course for the student's major may be placed, as determined by the state university or coordinated institution, in a course that is more advanced than the Gateway Math course if That course fulfills the math requirement for the general education and the student's major. So think about programs like engineering and architecture. They require calculus from that first semester. Students who need to take that and who are able to place into calculus from the get-go should not be required to first take college algebra. And finally, the part of this slide that we want to get across is that all aspects of this policy shall take effect by the beginning of the fall 2026 semester and shall apply thereafter. So if an institution does not comply with all aspects of the policy, there will likely be funding implications. All right, so that takes us back to Jen.
Thanks so much for covering the policy for us, Sam. Now we'll move forward and look at some resources available on our website. So this fall semester, we're pleased to offer a variety of stakeholder groups some professional development training related to math pathways. And we want to show you how stakeholders can access the information from our website. So on the left-hand side panel, stakeholders can navigate to Math Pathways, Professional Development and Implementation tab. From there, you can view the full list of training sessions and select those that best fit your needs. These trainings do range from one-time events like the webinar today to monthly meetings, such as those for the executive implementation teams and math faculty professional development sessions. We've had excellent attendance thus far at the EITs and the math faculty professional development sessions. And speaking of the professional development for math faculty, we have extended our website to include a math faculty resource bank. The resource bank allows math faculty and their executive leaders to easily access some takeaways from the training session. So this includes things like the agenda, presentation slides, meeting notes, chat questions, etc. The recordings are also available now for the 2 previous math faculty sessions, and our next one is coming up on October 18th. I also want to highlight another upcoming event. This is a lunch and learn designed specifically for academic advisors and hosted by Dr. Melinda Anderson. Dr. Melinda Anderson is the current executive director at Achieving the Dream, and her name might be familiar to you guys because she's the past executive director of NACADA, a premier association dedicated to student success through academic advising in higher education. So with these experiences, Dr. Anderson brings a wealth of firsthand knowledge in supporting advisors during the launch of system-wide initiatives. This session will provide advisors with valuable insights on how best to support students through the transition. We also want to draw your attention to another couple of resources on the KBOR website. The first is the Math Pathways Frequently Asked Questions section. We've collected these questions over the past few months and will likely continue to add to the list. So please consult this resource when you think of a question. It's likely the question has been asked and answered. If it hasn't, please work with your CAO who may have an answer for you, or if not, will contact us directly. Another excellent resource that we don't want to neglect to mention is the transfer portal. This website is where you can go to find all of the Kansas system-wide transfer courses. These are relevant to all 32 of the public post-secondary institutions in the state. You can click on the interactive searchable listing just by clicking the Transfer Kansas icon circled in red on the slide. This is an example of what comes up when you indicate you want to see math courses in the subject discipline box in the upper left-hand corner, and then narrow down the search by selecting Contemporary Math, Essential Math. This is, of course, only a section of the results that come up. If you weren't aware of the resource on our website already, hopefully you will find this helpful. We'd encourage you to please let others on your campus know about it as well. Before we conclude today, I want to be sure to mention the members of the Math Pathways Task Force Committee. These individuals have been meeting monthly for maybe over a year, definitely since I joined in February. And they continue to represent the institutions and help guide our work on all things math pathways. Similarly, we want to be sure to recognize members of the system-wide math course placement measures committee. While their work has now concluded, they were busy for many months, especially over the summer. And so we want to be sure to recognize their contributions and thank them for their service. And then finally, let's take a look at the project timeline. This information is pulled from the performance agreements report, so you've likely seen it before. For the fall 2024 semester and for academic year 2025, KBOR is working to provide sponsored professional development for a variety of stakeholders. At this time, institutions are also developing their co-requisite support sections for both English and math, and designing any of the gateway math courses that might be needed. Moving into fall 2025, this is known as the soft launch time period. System-wide course placement measures will be in effect, the multiple measures that we went through for each of the courses. And institutions are expected to offer at least one section of each gateway math course that applies to degrees on its campuses for fall of 25 and spring of 26. And then lastly, moving into fall of 2026 or academic year 2027, this is when we have full-scale implementation, including the system-wide course placement measures, the gateway math courses, and the co-requisite math and English Dev Ed education. And so that concludes our presentation today. We'd like to take a minute to introduce Dr. Connie Richardson, who's here with us from the Dana Center. She's been our consultant throughout the project. And so as you posted questions, you might have noticed Connie responding. So Connie, thanks so much for doing that for us. Are there any questions that stand out that we might want to start with to share with all attendees today?
Yeah, let me work backwards a little bit because you mentioned the advisors lunch and learn, and several people jumped in and said, how do I get registered for that? So I'm wondering if either of you has that registration link available. Someone noted that it still says forthcoming on the registration page.
It does, yep. So what we've been doing thus far is only opening up one registration at a time, just so people don't get confused. So after today's presentation, you will be able to go and register for the Lunch and Learn, and it will be on the professional development subpage, and I can drop that in the chat.
I know that there is work still happening on the floor for multiple measures. I wonder if you would like to address that now or.
Yeah, so I can speak kind of high level about that. And I just placed in the, oh, and so did Misty. So everyone doubly has the link where you can visit to gather the registration page when it's available. So when the Placement Measures Committee was meeting over the summer, they provided additional recommendations beyond the scope of the charge of the committee. And those recommendations have been very helpful. For example, the Placement Measures Committee provided recommendations on longevity of test scores. So how long should an institution consider an ACT or SAT score valid for placement into gateway math courses? One thing that the committee did not get around to finalizing was recommendations for when an institution might want to pause and really be sure to do some one-on-one conversations with a student in case they're not ready for the gateway math course with co-requisite support. So the Placement Measures Committee did reconvene in September to revisit that issue and make some recommendations. Those will be shared when they are ready with the chief academic officers of the institutions, and we'll ask the CAOs to share those out with their team.
a similar question, a similar type of question is about technical math and what is happening with technical math at the technical colleges as well as technical programs at community colleges, and potentially other institutions, I would assume. Are you ready to talk about what's happening in those discussions?
Math Pathways doesn't cover technical math. However, we do understand that there are questions about the math course for technical certificates and associate of applied science programs. So we are working with workforce development. Technical math is not an articulated system-wide transfer course, which is a little bit problematic. It doesn't transfer the same from one institution to another to another. And so I think that's probably the next step, hopefully, in getting everybody aligned with technical math. I can't speak to the specifics of that yet. We're not there yet, but I believe that is in the works.
Okay, thank you. It's a question about dual credit and how dual credit interacts with this work. And in particular, will dual credit be impacted by the co-requisite part of the work? So are high schools offering co-requisites? And if so, and also how much the placement measures apply to dual credit. So if a student has not completed their high school career, can GPA be used for placement into a college level course? And if that, if they do not meet that any of the criteria, then will there be co-requisites offered?
So let's start with that co-requisite piece. That's just kind of how my brain is working right now, if that's okay. So we don't recommend, we're very much against offering co-requisite support to high school students. High school students, if they want to take a college level course, should be college ready. Otherwise, they should be taking the content at the high school level, if that makes sense. Now, high school students, regarding placement into gateway level math courses for high school students, we just met with the dual credit steering committee and had this discussion. And so we looked at the HLC guidelines on dual credit. HLC recommends consistency between college courses offered at the high school and college courses offered on the college campus. That, I believe, reaches down into the placement measures as well. So we're trying to recommend consistency on all levels between, again, college courses offered at the high school and college courses offered on campus. So when it's possible, those placement measures for high school students should be consistent with the placement measures for college students to get into those gateway courses. So there are a number of ways high school students could demonstrate readiness for those courses, including the math ACT score, including an AccuPlacer score. If they are doing well, I can't remember the exact cumulative high school GPA required, but if they get a combination of that high school GPA thus far in their career and the requisite grade in the Algebra 2 second semester or third, math course in their high school career, they should be okay to be placed into a gateway level math course, just like a college student. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. So staying on co-requisites for a little while. So if a student is placed into a college level course with a co-requisite, can the co-requisite portion be used for elective credit?
No. Hopefully that was covered well during those slides, and we will be posting the slides, I believe, to the presentation as well, but policy covers that. It cannot be used toward the degree or certificate.
Let's see. There was a question, a couple of questions related to timeline. And so I know you mentioned a little bit about, fall of 2026 implementation. I wondered if you could say a little bit about the details of anyone who is potentially piloting in fall of 2025. And so fall of 2025, people have the option to start piloting. If they're piloting, then if they're piloting co-requisites and their math pathways, does that include that they would use the placement measures to place students into those classes? If so, do they use them in the pilot classes and in all classes, or only in the pilot classes, or they have that discretion to make that decision? And then kind of related to that, I think, is maybe the catalog question, right? For students who are entering in under an old catalog or fall of 2024 catalog or the fall of 2025 catalog, then do they stay under those catalogs, or does the full implementation in fall of 26 cover them as well?
So if students started prior to fall of 2026, they will be following whatever catalog year the institution places them in. We are not saying that you have to retroactively apply these policies to current continuing students. So the placement question was regarding fall of 2025 pilot. We are highly recommending that the placement measures be implemented fall of 2025. There should be plenty of time to prepare for that. They were approved in early September for math. We hope that they will be approved in early spring for the English courses. And again, this is about math, but I have to bring the English into this. And so, yeah, we would recommend that those placement measures be implemented fall of 2025 across the board.
But there's a lot of interest in the recording of your presentation. And so I mentioned that it'll probably be a few days before that happens. Let's see what's come in lately.
Yeah, Connie, while you're looking at potential questions that have just come in, just to reiterate, we will put the PowerPoint slides online as well as the recording. So please watch the website later in this week for updates on it.
So there is a question about the models and will institutions be required to assign a non-zero credit hour value for co-requisite support courses? And so the way I'm interpreting that is you assign a non-zero credit hour value in terms of how do you charge students for the support portion of the course. But if an institution chose to say that it is 0 credit and not charge the students, that is an option. And if I'm not interpreting that question correctly, if the asker would clarify.
But correct, Connie, the co-req support content can range from 0 to 3 credit hours. And it is up to the institution in terms of tuition fees and any of those decisions around if the student will be.
I wonder if I can go off script a little bit here. Not that we had a script about questions. I'm just teasing about that. But a lot of times institutions, when they first start with co-requisites, they feel like, we owe it to students to provide support for them. We shouldn't be charging them for 6 hours. And I would just encourage you to think about, or however many hours, to think about the number of hours that students were paying for under the prerequisite developmental model, and think of it kind of as an equivalent of that you are providing support. The reason I say that is not because I want you to charge students a lot of money, but when you think about that this program needs to be sustainable over time, and trying to cobble together funds from here and there and everywhere and not charge the students for the support, while admirable, probably means that you're going to run into funding issues down the road. And so I would just encourage you to keep sustainability in mind in the long term.
And Connie, could I add to that at the October Executive Implementation Team meeting, which is for CAOs and their team members, we will be talking about funding the Rec Dev support. And we have a few institutions who are piloting this semester who will be speaking about the funding model that they're using, as well as some other institutions who are just going to walk us through the different questions that they're considering while they make the decisions. So looking forward to that conversation in the upcoming weeks.
Let's see. So Sam, when you talked about, I think you were the one that talked about the HLC requiring the same dual credit as well as at the higher ed institution. You were specifically referring to the gateway portion of the course. Is that correct? So, so that doesn't apply to co-requisites. And so if you have a high school student taking a technical program that requires one of the gateway courses, they need to be college ready in order to be able to get into that technical program. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes. When we talk about technical programs, it's highly unlikely that contemporary math or elementary statistics would be required. We're probably talking about either college algebra or technical math. So again, the student would have to show readiness for college algebra if that's the requirement. They would have to show ready for technical math if that is. So I know those would be different because we haven't discussed system-wide placement measures for technical math. So again, I can't quite speak to that, but.
Okay. There is a question about Algebra 2, understanding that Algebra 2 is one of the measures by which a student might get into a gateway course. But if I'm interpreting correctly, potentially a student, if they meet one of the other placement requirements, they can take a gateway course without having completed Algebra 2. Or the question was really about whether high school algebra 2 is a prerequisite to taking college algebra.
I would say not necessarily, because as you said, they could meet one of the other measures. It's probably most likely that they would benefit by taking algebra 2 first, but again, it's not necessarily required.
We just got in maybe two really great questions to kind of wrap up the session, if that's okay with you. One question was about just the terminology between math pathways and gateway courses. So math pathways, we really speak about that as our umbrella term, if you will, that encompasses gateway courses. So that would be our 3 gateway math courses. It also encompasses the multiple placement measures decisions as well as co-requisite support. So that is more of our broad overarching term, the math. Then the second question was, what is a recommended pathway for undecided students? And I know that Dr. Anderson is going to be speaking with us about this. In particular, when we're working with undecided students, I think the word art that we took a look at could be really helpful, right? In thinking about meta majors and disciplines where a student's interest might lie. So if they remain in those broad meta majors, right, or the general interest areas, it's likely that their class will apply, even if they later change their major or decide on a different area. Where the rubber really meets the road, and I know people wonder about this, is if you have a student who's thinking they're going to be, say, in the humanities, and they take a gateway math course in that area, but then later decide they want to be a STEM student. And so that is the one case where an institution might decide, well, I don't mean to say the one case, but that's a likely case where the institution might decide that if the student has taken contemporary math or elementary statistics and they're going to be a STEM major, they will likely need to also take college. So those types of questions too are on our FAQ page. And then, like I said, I know that we're going to talk about that more coming up next week. Okay, Sam, any closing remarks?
No, thank you.
All right, well, we really appreciate everyone's time. Again, please check the website for further information, the recording of this, and we'll also go through the questions and be sure to respond to those that we didn't have time to get to live today. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.